Here we go.
Welcome to Nintendo Voice Chat for the week of January 25th, 2017. I'm Jose Otero, and this is IGN's Nintendo Show. Joining us this week, returning guest, Steve Lin.
Thanks for having me.
We have Brian Altano.
What's up?
And we have Per Schneider.
Hello.
So this week on Nintendo Voice Chat, we've got a pretty cool show for you. First, we're going to catch up with these guys and talk a little bit about last week's Fire Emblem Direct. Then we're going to jump into what we want to call the Nintendo roller coaster, and you're going to find out what that is. And then Steven here collects a lot of video games, and we're going to go through some interesting stories from his collection and some interesting pieces he brought in today. But let's kick things off with Fire Emblem Direct. Now, last week we talked about it, so we're not going to run it down. I'm just curious to hear from you guys. What did you think of it? You're the biggest Fire Emblem fan I know, Per, so let's start with you.
They announced way more stuff than I expected. I thought they would come out with, obviously that the event was centered around the mobile game announcement, and that they would go into detail. And by the way, you know, like, it's what I expected. I didn't expect a full-fledged Fire Emblem game. We'll talk a little bit about the gacha mechanics and how that's going to turn out. But you know, I was cool with it. It looks a little bit like a Fire Emblem Imposter. You know, like the artwork, it's like slightly off. You can tell it's not core franchise title. But I was expecting a 3DS announcement of sorts or DLC or something. What we got was Fire Emblem Gaiden, a return of that game coming to 3DS.
Yeah, a game based on Gaiden. It has a different subtitle, but still like a cool Fire Emblem 3DS game we didn't know about.
Awesome surprise. So Gaiden, that was the second game in the Fire Emblem series, has never been released here. So I was super happy to hear about that. That was the game that for the first time had an assist mechanic between like Alm and Celica, the main characters. So something that you consider to be a staple of the series now was introduced with that game, like the overworld map where you can like pick your mission, all that kind of stuff came in Gaiden. So really, really happy to see that introduced. But then they announced that they would be supporting the Switch with a Fire Emblem game. And like, you may say, okay, no-brainer. I don't think it's a no-brainer because we haven't seen one in a while, obviously, on a console. And maybe it's that hybrid portable nature of the machine that makes it, more of a target. But I thought that was great.
Yeah, Fire Emblem hasn't been on a console since Wii U. We didn't see one. And then we have Fire Emblem Warriors, but that's a spin-off game. What you guys think?
Oh, well, I mean, I was actually surprised that there was so much of it.
Yeah.
I heard Fire Emblem event, and it's like, okay, so we'll see 1 or 2 games, and then it's 4. It almost seemed like they assigned everyone to make a Fire Emblem game, and they didn't want to cut any of the ideas that came out. So they're like, oh, okay, that one's good too. That one, Heroes.
Do you think they made up the Switch game like minutes before the event? They're like, the Switch game.
Yeah, come on, you can do this. We'll just retest this one, right?
Why not?
Yeah. The other part for me, obviously, having been in the mobile games industry, was looking at Fire Emblem Heroes and how much more aggressive the monetization is on that game. I mean, to Per's point, it looks like they kind of reskinned an engine that DNA had lying around, with the Fire Emblem characters, and we could talk about what that's going to probably mean in terms of the gameplay.
Yeah, I think it was interesting coming off of Super Mario Run, which they got chastised for like not sort of nickel and diming enough with. Which I gladly threw $10 at and played probably for 15 hours. Like I like 99.9% of that game. Real quick, there's the end game in that game is so damn frustrating because the only thing left that I have to unlock is this like green 8-bit Luigi, and you have to get 2,500 green toads to get it, which takes like 40 hours, and it's just. Damn it, Nintendo, why? And I have to get it because it's the only thing I'm missing, and I'm just crazy like that.
Did you get all the coins?
Oh,
you got them all?
Yeah, I'm maxed out on coins. I have 99999.
Nice.
Well, I mean, I
got all the black coins, all the
that's
purple
what
coins.
It is the opposite monetization model, right? Like you had the console kind of handheld traditional model of paying something big up front, and there were a couple levels you could try, obviously. But now you got something that's very much a mobile game where, you monetize through orbs and a certain randomness factor and like getting ahead in the game by purchasing stuff, right?
Yeah, it's a different monetization method. Pokemon and Super Mario Run relies on tons, like millions of downloads and a small sliver of those people paying. Fire Emblem is a much more niche product. You're going to have fewer people playing it, but they're relying on the fact that the average revenue per paying user is going to be much higher. Like if you look at these games in Japan, some of them make, hundreds, if not thousands of dollars per paying user. And that's really the monetization method.
And do you expect it to be like Puzzle and Dragon? Like just kind of looking at the footage, did you get a sense of how, what kind of approach they will take with this game? more like strict, like much more kind of like more hooks, more monetization, more like, oh, you need to pull the lever and pay to get your secret next character.
I think, yeah. So they said the orbs are how you get characters.
Yeah.
They've also said that there's PvP, so there's player versus player, there's arena, and there's events, right?
Yeah.
So they can do a bunch of things. Like for events, they can charge for energy that you need to play the event, and the event is only 20 hours long, so you
Yep.
gotta pay in. And then if they, excuse me, if they go for the regular drop rates for really rare characters, like I think people now understand sort of the magic crate or whatever, or opening up pack of cards. They've had drop rates in previous games that are 0.01% drop rate, things like that, right? So you're going to be opening tons of packs or orbs and getting a lot of duplicate characters. They can do special edition characters, like Pikachu with the Santa hat, and so you can have like special edition Marth or something.
I play a lot of Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes,
Right.
And they do this really cool event-based thing there, and it's like the gameplay itself is pretty bare bones. It's kind of basic. There's even a button in the corner you can hit that'll just auto battle for you, which I like on the train. I'm just like, oh, I'm leveling up without really trying. But every now and then they're like Yoda pops up and he's like, there's an event and you need 4 5-star Jedis.
Right?
When 900 years old you become. So
$900 you charge.
So the weird thing about the game is like I actually can't really give it a lot of money because there's like you can just kind of grind and get everything you need. But every now and then there's an event and you need a bunch of like 4 or 5-star Jedis to fight and fight Yoda. And if you get enough, you unlock them. So I can see Fire Emblem doing that and sort of saying like every now and then there's a special thing. You have to bring these certain characters in. The only way to get those characters is to buy them piecemeal or unlock them through some sort of tedium. But I like that. But it's got sort of like a capsule toy mechanic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
gotcha.
I'm not a big Fire Emblem guy. I love the art style and I love the character direction, the art direction, the character design and stuff like that. The gameplay to me is a little bit sort of like it's a little bit too deep past the Advance Wars that I kind of want. But I'm incredibly hooked on capsule toys and stuff like that, and action figures and collecting. And
you will like spending your money on this one.
So why don't you guys explain, like, what is the gacha system exactly for someone who's listening for the first time? And really quickly, I didn't do a great job of explaining this at the start of the program, but our good friend and awesome friend of the show, Steve Lin, used to work in the mobile gaming space, has a ton of experience, ran a studio at one point. Like, he can tell you a lot about this business and this model.
Yeah, so what they actually called it in the press conference was gacha, which comes from gachapon, which is the capsule toy, right? So you put in money, turn the thing, and try to collect all of the toys. That's been used in Japanese games for over 10, 15 years now. It came to the U.S. about 5-6 years ago. I think we started seeing it with like Rage of Bahamut and games like that. So it's really random draw, right?
Yeah.
Or there's percentage chance drops for different things, and so there's low rare, like common, rare, ultra rare, everything like that. And things that are really rare have very low drop rates. So you might buy a bunch of these orbs. I think they showed a quick screenshot of the store, and they were pretty expensive. I think, we're used to, like, a crate is maybe $3 to $5.
Now, like Nintendo fans, I think specifically are used to a system like this. Now, it wasn't integral to the gameplay, but in Smash Brothers, you have a giant capsule toy machine where you unlock little things. Now, you're not like leveling them up or anything like that or trading them in, but
Heaven forbid you paid to get the Smash currency to have to unlock toys.
boy.
Like that's a whole, don't even say
But
it.
here it's, Magic the Gathering, like card games, right? Like you're getting more packs because there's this ultra rare card, and the attraction in Magic is like, well, you can use it, either you use it in play and it's part of your deck and people will go like, oh, I've never seen this card before. Or it may even be worthless in battle, but it's rare, and so it actually has real life worth, right?
Yeah.
Like you can sell it.
Exactly.
But in these games, like they also appeal to the completionist attitude where there is a set of items, right? Like in the 3DS badge system, right? You're like, oh man, I'm missing that one, and so I'm gonna put one more coin in, right?
Right. And so this will rely on a lot of draws. I think it all depends on how aggressive they want to get on the monetization, right? There's been events where people have spent thousands of dollars. I think there was a couple examples, people streaming on YouTube where everybody's cheering that person on in the beginning, and then once they cross like that $500 mark or something, like everybody's like, just stop, please stop, please stop, please stop buying.
You
these
have
orbs.
to pay rent.
Right.
Stop.
So, it's something that this is the first time
You feel
Nintendo.
bad.
bad.
They start feeling bad.
I think it's the difference between like cheering somebody on at a table like in Vegas.
Oh, yeah.
and
Oh,
then
it's
being
the
like,
same.
dude,
I
you
don't-
need help. Like we need to bring you to.
Yeah.
I see it as the same, but maybe I'm just not a big fan of
yeah,
gambling.
yeah.
Yeah,
And so I mean, with Fire Emblem, there's a lot of characters. There's a lot of different outfits and styles and everything. So the characters themselves are going to be a big draw with the orbs, but there's also, based off what they said, a lot of different ways. Like we're talking, a consumable energy that you do not have enough by default, right? So you need to spend to buy it. And if they go into something like guild battles, if you can start teaming up with other people and have guild versus guild, that's how the big mobile games are making money, right? It's not individual players; it's everybody pressuring you to spend to keep us
Which
competitive.
Nintendo has never really sort of preyed on or even optimized gently. The idea of playing a Nintendo game is something you usually do on your own time at home, or maybe on your 3DS whenever, and it's always ready to go. I mean, you've looked at stuff like that Rusty's baseball game where you had to piecemeal little things, but that wasn't like, oh, Rusty's tired, you can wake him up with some money.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
that's kind of where this
DNA
is
though
going.
making this
Yeah.
game, right?
Yeah.
And DNA does understand how to make
right.
those type of
Well,
games.
yeah. And as homework for Fire Emblem Heroes, I actually started playing, and this was on recommendation of Justin Davis, who's our features editor,
Record Keeper.
Keeper, because that if you know your mobile history or your mobile games, you know that DNA made that game. I think shortly before or way before they were acquired, Nintendo put a huge stake in that company and entered that business capital alliance, as they called it.
Yep.
And I will say that the time I've spent with it, if Fire Emblem leans more towards that model, which he praises that model. It seems like most people praise the way Record Keeper handled it. for the
Record
most
Keeper
part.
is a lot more friendly than a lot of
it's
the
fair.
other games.
Yeah.
Fair, right?
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
they had a controversy over the summer where they changed drop rates like halfway through an event, something like that. But it is a lot more friendly than some of the other ones that I've seen.
Yeah, and I'm having a good time with it. I didn't think that I would enjoy a lot of mobile games that are based around gacha mechanics, especially like the idea of energy that's renewable and you got to walk away. I find that it works out way better for my phone than it ever could for my 3DS, for example. Like I feel like I've played some games on there that tried that and I just had no interest because it's not the same kind of platform. I think for a phone it makes more sense too because you don't want something to kill your battery. You want a quick session and then get out.
It also can catch you at a time where you're like, I really want a video game right now. Like you're waiting for something that gets delayed by half an hour. You're stuck on a train in the morning.
Yep.
You're like, I want to play this game and I can't. But if I throw it $2, I mean, what's $2? Like it cost me $2.50 just to get on the train.
Right.
So like, yeah, here you go. Here's my money.
Yeah. So they'll be aggressive, but I just hope that DNA, sort of talks some sense into how they should approach it. But because we've seen them go expensive before. What was it? Oh my goodness, I can't believe I already forgot the name of it. But the first app that we got from Nintendo, Miitomo, had $90 transactions in it, but you had no reason to really ever go near it
They're
because
also hard to even find.
Well, it was. Some people didn't even know they were there. Exactly. Right. Whereas this thing, it will be way more direct in terms of how it's going to roll that stuff out. It would at least appear so, given that the system that it's relying on.
Yeah. To Perrin and Brian's point about the whole collection mechanic, Record Keeper has autoplay, which sounds ridiculous, right? Like, why would you want the game to play itself? It's like sometimes you want that to happen, right? I don't want to go through this battle. I'll just let it battle itself, and then I'll get the reward so I can get more orbs.
Yeah, actually, I mean, I would play more RPGs if they were like that in general. It's like the game I was just talking about before. Like, you can kind of nudge it along. Like, I can be like, hey, Chewbacca, beat the hell out of Wicket the Ewok.
Right.
But other than that, like, I hit the button and he's just doing it on his own. So I kind of like that. It's passive. It gives me an opportunity to sort of like check out my environment and my surroundings in the real universe that I'm in, sort of just be like, I can hit a button, put it in my pocket, walk down the street, go out to get a coffee, reach in and be like, oh, I won.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of cool.
What's an acknowledgement that the game is not very deep, right? And
Yes,
that's not
that's
really
for
why
sure.
you're paying for it. It's like, but you're entertained enough. Just get rid of the stuff that's
And we're
annoying.
seeing that with Heroes, especially given that everything happens on one screen.
Yeah.
You're not
Right.
like scanning this massive battleground, and I want to see how that sort of
Sure,
translates.
and it definitely works better for specific genres. Like if you did that with Super Mario and you went to pull out your phone and he's on the top of the flagpole, you'd be like, oh, good for you.
Right?
Yeah, no,
less
totally. The
exciting.
autoplay, yeah.
Yep.
All right, so then let's head over to segment 2, which is all about what we affectionately are calling the Nintendo roller coaster. Now, hang on, before you close the browser window, this is a segment where we're basically going to come at the Nintendo Switch, the device itself. Last week, we talked a little bit about the presentation and sort of how we felt, but now it's coming at, okay, now that everything we see is out there, all the information we have out there, how do we feel about Switch? and we're going to name one good thing, and we're going to name one concerning thing. I think that's really important for us to do.
I hope they put a Nintendo roller coaster in their theme park.
Woo!
Has
Get
all
ready.
these predictions on it.
We'll see. But who wants to kick it off? Because I asked everyone to kind of list theirs, and I actually didn't get to list mine because I was waiting. So I'm going to go
changing mine,
last.
So you get some
You're
time.
changing yours.
Yeah.
So you're going to lead a whole.
Are we
system.
doing?
Yeah,
Should
The
we
roller
do?
coaster's already down for maintenance.
Roller
It's
coaster.
falling apart.
I'm picking
Someone
track
below
2
the
right
height
now.
got on.
So what? Like bad thing first? Bad thing first, good thing then? Like
Start with a good thing.
Yeah, start with
Yeah?
a good thing.
Yeah,
Let's kick it
come
off
on.
positive.
Everybody's been beating up on
All right.
Yeah, and everybody
Yeah,
loves the
yeah.
good news. When someone's like good news
Good
or bad
thing.
news, you want to hit
All
the
right,
good news.
I'm gonna say hardware because I've just kind of reading feedback and people are equating this device to the power of an Xbox One or a PS4, which of course it does not deliver that same sort of oomph. I actually think they got a lot right with the hardware. First of all, there's the kind of the attractiveness factor of a piece of hardware that you look at and you just want to mess around with. And like consoles can be really boring boxes, right? They can be very boring to interact with. They built this kind of cool mechanic with the docking and the sliding of the controllers. Like all of that kind of stuff appeals to me. Like I just want to take it. I want to take it out there and I want to play with this thing.
It's got that sort of tangible nature to it where you just want to pick it up, which I think when you look at the design of the Wii U, the gamepad itself was like kind of chunky and funny looking, but the console itself was probably the most boring looking video game console ever made.
Yeah.
It was just like this like weird like oval, square, rectangle. It was just like, oh, well, that's fine.
Whereas, like, I look at this machine and it's different. Like, it's just like there's no other device like it. Like, my iPad doesn't look like that. My iPad can't do the weird stuff with the controllers. And so when you then drill down, like, obviously, power-wise, it's not going to live up to these other machines, but it's respectable, right? Like, if you think of a beautiful Wii U game like Mario Kart 8, and then you put it on a screen and you take it with you, there's nothing like that. There's nothing like that, right?
Well, and I will
like,
say that like every demo station I went to, I was compelled to constantly take controllers off, put them
You
back on.
wanna hold it,
It
right?
didn't
Wax on,
matter.
wax
like
off.
even if I was just I'd done it like 3 other stations ago, it was still like this impulse of like, okay, new demo station, rip them off, okay, put them in the dock, all right, play with the grip, all right, put them back on, okay, take up the like you can't help it. You kind of get wrapped up in wanting to constantly do it.
and then with the please, I mean, Wayne, the other attractiveness factor, like the other thing about the hardware is just the versatility, and like it can be quite overwhelming, right? Like if you remember the Wii U days, you had all these different controllers, and it can be daunting. And I think this one slims it down. It still has a lot of plastic pieces, but I love how versatile it is. That like it can convert into this travel system where you instantly have a 2-player setup, which we never had with Vita, right?
Yeah,
like you take your Vita out, it's a solitary experience no matter what. With this thing, they're really encouraging that kind of communal playing, and you can easily set it up. Like if you're with your buddy on the bus, you can just hand him a controller, and like
there's
you don't
no
think about
sensor
it.
bar with a 30-foot cable, and there's no like weird little like nunchuck with a dongle on, like all those funny like ropes you had just sitting in your drawers after the Wii
Well,
and the
think about
Wii U.
it. When was the last time a console came with 2 controllers?
Yeah.
Effectively.
Yeah.
Right?
Famicom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
it's been a really long. That's really.
You didn't have a
interesting.
choice with the
And
original Famicom. They were
And they're
wired
hardwired in, but
Yeah.
and I'll get to
immediately-
my bad thing in a second, but like also when you just take the Joy-Con, the little gamepad, which is of course that's the on-the-go solution to turn it sideways, but there's a lot of stuff in that thing.
Yeah.
And just like it doesn't have analog triggers like, the PlayStation or the Xbox One controller would. It does have a battery, unlike the Xbox One controller, though, right? Like you don't have to pay extra for that, and you have 2 of them in the pack, of course. But man, the HD Rumble, I think it's very clever that we're experimenting with it. On the Xbox, I love the Rumble triggers, right? That was a cool innovation for me. On the PlayStation controller, I like the touchpad, but this one has NFC in it, and it has that IR camera in it, which we have not seen in a controller like that before,
Yeah, and it's probably the source of the wackiest things you'll ever do with this thing, from your hand shape and where like it is in proximity to it, to even did you see that 1-2 switch game where you're holding it up and sort of nibbling at a sandwich? Well, you're not
sandwich.
nibbling, you're just straight up chomping.
Yeah, we
at a
had that.
sandwich.
We had that running on the live stream here in like the editorial pit in IGN, and we're all just like, what are we doing with our lives? Like this is incredible.
But and to me as an age-old Nintendo fan who loved the wackiness of Nintendo experiments like WarioWare Twisted, like when I see all these little things that they built into these Swiss Army knives, like I get excited as to what they can do with it. Now, that doesn't protect them from, like, they need to convince other developers to use these tools in a smart way that it's not annoying, because remember Waggle, right? Like any motion was turned into Waggle even if it didn't have to, and that's terrible. But I hope companies have grown up and are using these features for good rather than just because they're there. So I'm really excited about the hardware.
I think there's an interesting sort of like jack of all trades thing that the controllers are doing right now. I'm hoping it's not like a master of none. The cost of that is obviously being passed down to the consumer, and if those aren't effectively used by any developers, then you're basically spending $80 for controllers that you might not get to utilize every cool aspect of. But there is a lot of great ideas in them, and I hope it sort of sparks some creativity in developers to do cool and crazy stuff, because that's when Nintendo's at their best.
Yep.
I just hope that at the same time there is the expectation from the audience that not every. I feel like we've seen Nintendo introduce ideas to their platforms. We had like 3D, for example, being a major selling point for 3DS. We had, the Wii Motion Plus, which was eventually like the redone Wii Remote, like the way it should have been from the start.
Patch.
But we got there. Like we got to the point where the technology was cheap and we can put that out. And then slowly they built it into everything. But one thing that you have noticed too when Nintendo has these experiments is that I feel like the expectations for how often they should use them and what they should use them for are all over the place from their fans.
Yeah.
I feel like the minute there were games they were putting out on digital shops that they were not no 3D supported, something like Box Boy, it becomes, well, then why is this here? Or etc. Like you can even point to, I'm pretty sure, plenty of other like tiny experiments the company has tried where they kind of just put their hands up because they didn't want to force it. There were times where they did and there were times where they didn't. But I feel like then it became this huge talking point. Well, then why is it here?
But then there's also times when it is there and it actually hinders the overall scope of what the final product could have been. I look at something like Star Fox, which came so late in the game of experimenting with dual screen gaming, that I think that some of that kind of got in the way of what would have been more classic arcadey traditional game. Same with Paper Mario. So, but it's tough,
that
right?
was the screen on the Wii U gamepad was that console's feature. That was the big differentiating factor. I don't feel like the differentiating factor here is that it has distinct marbles and a controller rumble or anything. Those are just kind of like the bells and whistle on top that hopefully inspire developers.
And that's what I want people to see.
And I like that about that machine.
I like that about
it. The core conceit of this machine is same experience on the go that you're getting at home, and guess what? That experience at home is better than what you got on the Wii U, and that's pretty amazing feat to pull that off as a handheld, right? Like when the Vita came out, we didn't say, "Oh, these graphics are so crappy," right? Like we're like, "Man, this is a nice device with a bright OLED screen," and like it was just a cool device. Ultimately, it was undone by the software support, right? And hopefully, we're not seeing that here.
What better game to live up to what you're talking about than Zelda Breath of the Wild at launch?
Totally.
Regardless of it being a Wii U game, it is very much a game that no portable platform that I can think of has executed something like that. That is so cool.
I mean, even if it's a feature like the HD Rumble that's only used in one game, but if that experience really pulls you into that game, then it's worth it, right? To
Mission
Dave's point.
accomplished.
I don't need to have every single game have HD Rumble. I just need it for someone who it's part of their vision in terms of what they want to make in the game, and they use it. It
was like playing Twilight Princess, where I was like, okay, like the waggle's not doing it for me, but pointing is. Like, the pointer controls in that game were phenomenal, and being on day one, being like, I'm shooting arrows and hook shots with pointer controls. I remember like that Sky Temple where you have dual hook shots.
And you heard the sound come from the controller.
You heard there was something really
catching
special
bugs
about that. Oh really cool stuff.
Really dope. All right, you're bad.
So that was the good. And by the way, there are a couple of I did a little controller comparison between all the different controllers. Like there are differences, right? Like the Switch controller does not have a speaker like that. What you just described from the Wii, you couldn't do on there. Whereas the PlayStation one has obviously has lights and a speaker, and the Xbox One and the PS4 one have like a direct low latency mode when you plug it into USB. We don't know enough about this, but we do know that they don't have a USB port on them, right?
The speaker thing directly
20 hours on the battery
the speaker
life.
thing directly bums me out about Suda announcing a new No More Heroes game because I want to be able to answer my phone at that game. That was awesome.
Well, they do. They can simulate you picking it up with the IR stuff now. But so the bad is inevitably it's a no-brainer. It's price, right? $300 is a lot for a handheld device. It's not a lot for a console, but it is a lot when you compare it to the other two machines out on the market, where you obviously an Xbox starts at like 250. So price is a concern, but I think more price when you really take in all the other little things that you have to pay for. Like the dock priced at $80 is not okay to me, right? Like
I thought it was 90.
not 90.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a
90.
dock, not everybody needs a dock, and so maybe it becomes this luxury item for people with two TVs.
Clearly,
but,
at $90 is luxury.
right? But 90 is stupid because the actual machine costs you $300, right? And like you really got to start thinking at that price point. But it's more like all the little things on top of it, right? Like if you want to do a wired connection, you're going to need the USB wired adapter. If you want to charge your controller when it's not attached to the device, you're going to have to buy the charge grip for $30 because the grip included is not a charger, right? Like all those little things.
Pro controller.
Yep.
Yeah.
Pro
$70
controller is
Yeah.
that's very expensive compared
Pre-order
to the
now.
$59 DualShock 4 and the Xbox One S controller, which are both really, really good controllers, by the way.
Right.
Not as much as an Elite controller or something, but obviously, it's a lot. Now, that said, a full package, a Switch with 4 controllers, if you're willing to go small, is actually a lot cheaper than buying an Xbox or a PlayStation 4 with 4 controllers. Again, Xbox doesn't have chargeable battery packs either, right? And so when you stack them up against each other, it's not that the Switch is outrageously priced when you go for a full 4-player setup, but it's just a hard pill to swallow. I think when you look at the power of the machine when you connect it to a TV compared to the others.
But it is also understanding, just the convenience of what it is. Because I feel like in the comparisons to platforms, I mean, those other two, when you go out on a trip, they stay home.
Yep.
And that's where they're going to be. And you can do all the wireless remote connection you can. And some of the technology on that stuff has progressed and it's been cool. But at the end of the day, that's still not a thing that you took with you. And I think that is a very special selling point for this thing.
Yep.
I've seen some folks suggest, will they ever separate those two things? I don't think that's a reality for them. I think that the Switch concept is home, portable,
Yeah.
and tabletop mode, which was weird. That that's a third mode, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm still figuring that out.
I've seen a lot of price comparisons to the Xbox One controller, to the DualShock 4. The DualShock 4 is probably my favorite video game controller of all time. It's just fantastic. But the battery life on it is like 5 hours. And on the Switch Pro controller, it's like 40, and it's got NFC built in. So you're paying $10 more. It's actually weird to me that the Pro controller on the Switch lasts 40 hours and the unit itself lasts 2.5. Like, I wish those two could talk to each other. Be like, dude, how are you lasting so long?
Beaming
Like,
power over.
I think
some battery tips.
I think 2.5 will definitely be the bottom of like playing on Wi-Fi in a multiplayer game. I think you'll get more playtime out of
Pokemon.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think where the 300 is actually going to hurt even more is the fact that it is a portable device. It's probably going to be breakage, or you're going to lose a controller, right? I mean, you can't walk down the block without getting an iPhone repair shop. So people are going to be dropping that thing, especially with kids. You're going to be losing Joy-Cons. So that's what kind of worries me. It's like, this thing's $300. We'll throw it into a bag, but some people going to be where are you
I
doing
think the
that,
costs
right?
start stacking up very quickly. When you look at the console itself, $299. I'm still kind of bummed it doesn't come with a pack-in game or anything like that. But to have the console itself and have the Joy-Cons and the grip, which is, by the way, the grip is such a weird thing that it doesn't actually charge. But they sell one that does. And the only way to get this thing is in the system itself. You can't buy that thing piecemeal, like a non-charging grip. So Nintendo is effectively selling you this piece of hardware, this peripheral that doesn't exist outside of its own containment unit. I find that very odd.
There'll be third-party grips, I'm sure.
But I mean, you get the console for $299 plus, tax, shipping, all that other stuff, whatever you need. And all of a sudden you buy the Pro controller, maybe you want the charging grip, maybe you buy some other stuff. You're looking at like $500 all of a sudden.
Day one.
And that's without a game.
It'll add, and that's, I think that's where the comparison is unfavorable, because if you go back to when the Vita came out and you look at the Vita, it's like, the Vita didn't have the option to expand that way, and so it never looked as daunting and as expensive. And so what Nintendo is doing now is they keep on saying, no, it's a console, right? Like when people say, well, but it's different, it's a handheld, and look how good the graphics are for a handheld, Nintendo still has to say, no, it's a console, because they want to justify the high price. And
I feel like it's like when you're on the highway and there's like a motorcycle that goes in like the other lane. It's like, I'm a bike. And then it's like, I'm a car again. And the cop's like, I just want to pull you over and give you a ticket.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on. Who wants to go next? Either Brian or Steve?
I'll go next.
All right.
So
I want to see what you wrote.
I love the idea that the Nintendo Switch is bringing console quality gaming anywhere you want. I think the Vita experimented with this. I think you mentioned before about the sort of like, we looked at the graphics about how they weren't as great as the PS3 at the time. We weren't as judgmental on it because I think we kind of had a feeling that Sony would get a lot of third-party support on that. Whereas on Nintendo, we're like 3 or 4 consoles in a row now being like, where's the third-party support? Get on the phone and fix it. But the fact that you can play a game like Zelda on the go anywhere is stunning. I want to see more and more stuff like that. Even Skyrim, which is like, you know, a couple years old, but the idea of that is great. Getting on a cross-country flight, flying to Germany for Gamescom and playing 9 hours of Skyrim is crazy, or however long I can plug in for. That being said, the storage issue is still something that's...
This is your bad.
This is your bad?
This is my bad.
All right.
The good is obviously that, like, oh, here's the thing, and here's a quick caveat, and you're going to hate me for this, Steven, but I go all digital these days.
I do too.
You do?
actually.
What?
Yeah, yeah.
But you're a collector.
Yes, I'm a collector, but I've been digital on most of my consoles since.
Well, you buy
digital
them twice,
became a thing.
probably.
No, actually, I don't. I don't buy steel books or anything. Yeah,
Interesting.
I went digital.
That makes me feel so much better.
Well, actually, quickly to your point, when I was in Japan for about 6 weeks, and that was when Last Guardian came out, right? And I saw all these like videos, and I wanted to play it, so I ended up buying a PS4 in Japan to connect to my hotel TV,
dedication,
so that I
right
could
there.
play the game.
Right.
If I had something portable, I would have done that.
And by the way, I own a Vita. I own the original unit. I really like the device, but I kind of stopped playing games after a while and just kind of playing the games included with the PS Plus subscription, right? But like on Vita was striving to be the console on the go. But the Uncharted we got was not the Naughty Dog Uncharted, right? Like we got the little brother always on that machine. Whereas like we're not getting Hyrule Warriors as our main Zelda game. We're getting the Zelda game, right?
Zelda.
You're talking to me.
So
What just happened?
my concern with all this is obviously as a guy who
German.
wants to go all digital, I'm hearing from a lot of people who predominantly do go digital, like don't do it with the Switch, and I'm like, no, I'm going to push back against that because I know it comes with 32 gigs of onboard memory, but it expands up to 2 terabytes using micro SD cards. Now, those don't exist yet.
Yeah, it's a lot of money,
get the
man.
money out.
Yeah.
Jesus.
So, and this is what-
$200 for 256 already, right?
Well, so the pricing's getting really weird on all this. So it's like
It'll get
$40
cheaper.
for like 100 or 120 or something like that. And then for 200 gigs, it's like 60. And you're like, cool, things are looking good. And then you go to like 250 and it jumps up like $150.
It's like
So-
TVs. Like
Yeah.
once you go beyond 65 inches, it's
Right.
twice the
so
price.
somebody in the Podcast Beyond Facebook group gave me a good tip, which are basically with the Samsung recall, people were sending in their phones and being told to they could keep their memory cards and getting those replaced. So they're actually kept a lot of like 256 gig micro SD cards, which are now on eBay for very, very cheap. I was able to get one for like $70.
Are you serious?
So now I'm pretty future-proofed for a while. But again, the micro SD card racket on eBay is like, there's fake ones. There's people that resell them, reskin 32 gig ones and stuff like that. So that's sort of the storage issue. It gets weird. Now, that's not even docked. The last few Nintendo consoles have sort of had this like hidden octopus problem of like, if you look at the Wii U, it's like, oh, here's a sleek machine. It's got everything right there. And then you need that external hard drive, which needs its own power unit and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we're going to be able to get an external hard drive for the dock, what transferring things from there to the Switch is
I
going to
think
look
that
like.
gets too complicated.
I think so, too.
I think so, too.
That's
This is
an
the
option.
SD card.
So
Yeah,
I think
you
it just
needed to
gets,
see
it starts
that,
getting
yeah.
confusing. So, I don't know. We want console quality games. Console quality games are like 30, 40, 50 gigs now.
Yeah.
The system itself holds 32. Zelda takes a third of
13,
that.
13, I
So
think, yeah.
we're already
13
like
was.
day one. I think if you bought maybe 3 or 4 out of the 5 or 6 launch games, you'd already be pretty packed digitally.
See, I
Well,
always
it's not-
buy.
It's installing though, right?
Right.
If you're buying them digitally.
Yeah.
Right?
you're buying them
I
digitally.
buy so, and obviously, you know, if you have multiple Switches in a household like mine with kids, like you want to buy a cartridge because there's no family sharing between the units, right? Like, so you want to be able to take it out
Yeah,
and give
log
it to
into the
somebody
same
else.
account.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, we
So-
don't know that one
so-
yet. I think there might be some hope at the end of that one. I
There's
hope
something
so.
coming, yeah. But I buy single player games that have kind of like a finite campaign. I buy them on cartridge, and anything like Puyo Tetris, I would buy that digitally because I want to have that on my machine.
Yeah.
Or something like Picross.
Yeah.
I want to take it with me everywhere. So I kind of pick and choose.
I totally
but more,
agree with you on
more
that.
because I'm worried about running out of storage too.
I do feel like, though, it's not a unique problem to Nintendo, right? I do think, though, that 32 gigabytes is too small. I'm
Yeah.
going to just say, like, flat up front, like, that it stunned me that they didn't bring it up during the conference. But when I saw the number, I was like, maybe that's why. Like Zach said that last week, and the more I think about it, the more that seems true. But I do think that the SD card solution they've come up with, the micro SD solution, is a good one because I feel like I'm in the
better
same
than
boat.
the Vita, right?
Oh yeah,
So,
God, those are still. I think it costs more than a
Well,
Vita.
those were proprietary. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right. I forgot about that. But
exactly.
my other
Yeah.
part of this is that it's not a problem exclusive to them, just because like I am, I own a PlayStation 4, I've owned my Xbox One, and I go all digital on every purchase.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it bums me out, and I've talked about this on the show before, but that I have to delete purchases when I get a new game. I'm just like, it's driving me nuts. I'm at the point where like, I'm either buying a new machine, which is a little too expensive. I should just get the hard drive.
Yeah.
Like that's the solution. And that's clearly the solution here. You're going to pay for the expanded storage just for the peace of mind of, okay, now I've gone all digital. I don't have to care anymore.
Yeah, I think where it gets trickier is that like a 2 terabyte hard drive to put in your PS4 Pro is mostly cheaper than a 250.
Oh no, yeah,
For
sure.
sure.
Technology,
Micro
the
SD.
smaller it gets, absolutely, but
Yeah.
it's still an added price that wasn't there at launch that I have to really worry about at the moment.
So
that-
I'm interested
that
to see
being
how
my
all of
point.
this sort of like fleshes out because like I said, I would love to have just a bunch of games on that thing. I don't want to be in a scenario where I'm carrying the Nintendo Switch and a bunch of games and like charging cables and all this other stuff. I want this to be something I can just chuck.
Well,
in
look
my
at your
bag.
3DS, right? And
Yeah.
how you have like a bunch of games on it. You went all digital on that one, and it worked out for the most part.
I think I hit the ceiling on that after like 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
like,
Wow.
and it was with which Xenoblade, the one that
Yeah,
was
well,
like,
that one was huge.
it's like, that was the first game where I installed and was like, oh, you're taking about like a
Quite
fourth.
possibly the
Yeah.
biggest
Yeah.
3DS
Yeah.
game, I think.
Yeah, I went
in
all digital on
production.
3DS, and I have like 150, like something a stupid amount of games. on
But
there,
that's
so.
the promise. The promise here is that you will get full-fledged console games. And so once some companies will wake up and say, hey, this thing is pretty cool, let me port a 360 or a PS3 game to it.
Right.
Those weren't tiny either, right? Like it's going to start adding up when you get your Darksiders and all that kind of stuff.
What I'll
on
do
there.
is I'll probably put a bunch of digital games on there, and then I'll have like there'll always just be one in the chamber, right? It'll be like
Yeah.
it'll be Skyrim or Zelda,
60
or-
gig.
Whatever the big one
the
is.
big game stays in there.
And
everything
we're not
else
even
goes
talking
digital.
about Virtual Console yet, which is just that whole other
Yeah.
black.
Those are small.
tiny.
Those are so tiny.
No, but that's where
Yeah.
that's going to be like, oh my god, like how many games do I have on this thing? Like it's going to be out of control. I
Well,
feel
you've
like more
read
so.
that thing of like it's like a JPEG of the original Super Mario Brothers is a bigger file than the game Super Mario.
Yeah.
Brothers.
That's-
Yeah,
I love stuff
exactly.
like that. So
All
make
right.
it easier.
So
Yeah.
then, Steven, we're going to end on you only
Okay.
because we're a little pressed for time, but that
Okay.
doesn't mean rush. That just means take as long as you want.
Okay.
So let's hear your roller coaster. Your good and your bad.
Yeah, so my good is we get more Nintendo games, right? The Wii U was pretty rough, I think, for a lot. There's really good highlights, but when you see what's coming out just from Nintendo for the Switch, I'm really excited to play Zelda. I can't wait to play Super Mario Odyssey. There's a new Splatoon. There's just when you see that lineup and maybe what they could potentially do, just seeing more Nintendo games is always great for me. You know, it's
And that's the pre-E3 lineup, right?
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know,
Right.
you know they're going to announce the future
Oh, yeah.
of the system, and we haven't even heard what Retro is up to, right? Like
Right.
there are more games coming, obviously.
Yeah, and there's
Yeah.
other producers who are conspicuously absent, like the guy who worked on Captain Toad. We haven't seen or heard of a game from him
Yep.
for a while. That's also the same guy who worked on NES Remix.
Right.
There are other producers at Nintendo that I'm just curious to see when they surface. When Iguchi shows up and says, "Hey, Animal Crossing, here's the real story behind
Right.
what we're doing with that," and hopefully. I mean, where's the camera cam? Hopefully, Sean, right here on me, please. Metroid. There's a series called Metroid that so many fans have been asking for. This is your time. This is it. You announced Fire Emblem with a logo. You can't even hide behind. We don't do logos. Yes, you do. All right, back to Steve.
they don't seem to care about Metroid in Japan. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just pretty clear because
we need more show hosts looking directly to the one-shot camera.
Right,
That'll
yeah.
change.
if you look at it, it's like Kirby and Splatoon,
Yep.
right? It's all over Japan, but everything else was just
It'll happen.
It'll happen.
It will happen.
Yeah, and there's we gave you Kid Icarus and nobody bought it, right?
Yeah.
They'll say things like that, right?
Yep.
Or we gave you this.
The sun comes up and the world still spins.
Right.
I'm waiting for this thing. I'm
The
sorry.
sun comes
Yeah.
up and it's shaped like Kirby.
Right, yeah, exactly. And then he swallows it. I'm just, like I said, I want more Nintendo games. This is now their team that is learning a new system, but it's not too big a leap, right? They've got all these new toys to play with in the hardware to Paris point. So I'm excited.
Well, and to your point, I hope this is more of an experimental Nintendo that, like, hey, you took a chance on Splatoon and you nailed it. Like, we
Right.
all had our doubts going in when that game came out, how it was going to do. We definitely saw there was something special to it, but we didn't really grasp it until we spent a lot of time with it. And then like a lot of us sort of turned around and were like, oh my God, this is one of the best new IPs they've done in years.
Right.
We've seen I feel like, I hope ARMS is to some extent that game. What Splatoon was to shooters, I hope to some extent ARMS is to fighters, although they kind of have that already with Smash Brothers. That's kind of the problem. I don't know if you can win that second time, but we'll see. But I just hope they will be more confident in trying new ideas and saying, you know what? Why not? Captain Toad can have his own video.
Well, it's not even like, trying, right? It's like they have to, right?
Yeah.
They have to take risks at this point if people are only going to buy Nintendo games.
And,
That's right.
and I think, I mean, if you look at the Wii U 3DS era and you kind of add up all the games that were coming out between those two machines, right? If the Switch is that kind of the merger of the handheld and the console lines, and I know the whole like, oh, we'll support 3DS. I've heard that story before with the Game Boy too, but I am hoping that the Switch will become the console and handheld solution for most of their stuff. And then I hope the 3DS line will be faded out and they will bring back a Game Boy Advance as an all-digital device that's really tiny and flat. And you just download classic GBA games to it for $5 for playing on the go. Like something like that, where you have the tiny device that will literally fit into any pocket, and then the Switch for the higher quality on the go and at home gameplay. I think we're going to see so many more games for that one device then,
Yeah.
So
I mean, it looks like they're definitely reaching into the library. So Virtual Console is probably going to be hopefully less archaic or
totally.
sort of random as it's been. And it's like, we saw what we didn't expect with the NES Classic. Right?
Yep.
People are willing to buy these games. Like, let's start doing that with Super Nintendo and N64, GameCube.
make those
Especially-
little digital handhelds.
Well, and especially because
Take
they
with you.
introduced this console when they started getting down to the nitty gritty about it with this has inherited all of our DNA in terms of all of our consoles. And that could be just marketing speak. But, you look at that device and you're like, man, if the GameCube game rumors are true, that's going to be a fun thing to have. I'd like to just play Sunshine Anywhere to play, although you'd be playing it again. But Wind Waker, F-Zero GX would be awesome. Just saying, Metroid Prime.
And a lot of people aren't playing it for the first time too, right? Like we always say that
we're
we're
so
going
many
to
years
buy
out,
them again.
right? Yeah.
The majority of people who play video games did not buy a Wii U, so don't get me that. Don't give me that Mario Kart 8 on the go is not exciting because you've played it before. You haven't.
But you know what's not going to
Most
make
people
it?
have not.
Probably with Virtual Console, and it hasn't really dawned on us yet. I don't think the Wii games make it. I know that the Joy-Con
You could,
resemble
right?
the Wii because
Right.
they do look somewhat like it. But if you think about that, most of those games are designed around a pointer. What are you pointing to?
Oh
With
man,
the
I guess I'll
Joy-Con?
have to remake Skyward Sword without any motion controls. What will happen? Oh man, what a bummer.
But it's not.
Please
just
do that.
But not just that one.
Yeah,
You
of
had
course.
wacky stuff like Smooth Moves. Or
Yep.
I'm
Yep.
sure Wii Sports will resurface in some way, right?
I hope
but,
so.
I would like
fun
to
to play
see
in a
the Wii
plane.
era survive in some form, and I just don't think. I think some folks have the expectation that's going to happen, and it's not. Like, where's your sensor bar? Where's your pointer? There's other factors here, and Nintendo is very timid when it comes to emulation. If you noticed how they really do it, right? They don't take chances on things sometimes. Sometimes they won't even remake. Oh my goodness! Like, won't re-release Yoshi's Island. Yoshi's Island. What is the story there? Like, Yoshi's Island ran on the Super FX chip, and it is one of those games that will never be re-released, and it's also a classic game. But because, for whatever reason, they don't, when it involves a little more hardware, they just like tiptoe away, like, we don't want people to have a bad experience. We'd rather focus on something else.
I feel like every new console they make or every new handheld they make, there's something in it that's sort of like they all just get on the boat and they wave goodbye to a few things.
Like,
right?
we'll see you.
It's like, oh, buy dual screen gaming. Like anything that ever worked on the 3DS will not work. Or that really hinged on two screens.
Right.
Even with the Wii U, a lot of games that were on Wii U, you can't just drag and drop over to the Switch without them sort of like. I mean, even something like Star Fox would have to be totally retooled. So motion control games, a lot.
They'll have to adapt them, like Advance Wars designed for dual screens will
Now you
have
just
to be
twist
adapted.
it like like portrait style, right?
yeah,
You
DS
have
games
that.
and us
Yeah.
will make it in. All right, time for your bad. Let's hear it. What do you got?
Quickly on the bad, I really don't feel like we're going to see a lot of third-party support for the Switch. They have to, developers don't have a whole lot of development budgets are so high, and for developing for the Switch, for a game that doesn't port to other systems or will sort of fare poorly against other games on the other systems, it's an investment, right? And I just don't see a lot of companies doing it. I hope that they make development tools easier, and you can you don't have to use this high fidelity graphics, so maybe you can do something there. But I just we saw Bomberman and Street Fighter, a couple other things, but I just don't see that happening.
Yeah,
We're seeing stuff
we-
like the last gen version of FIFA running and
Yeah,
stuff like
well,
that.
in that case, though, that's a. They haven't really said which FIFA's coming. That's a
Right.
great.
Right, they
point.
didn't, like, put a
they
year
didn't
on it, right?
Yeah,
They're
they
just
put a
like, it's
year on
FIFA,
it, and
right?
that sets up the whole like, wait, what's going on?
Right.
I do think though that on the conversely, if this thing does become a hit and if it does sell well, those budgets will get made. It's just on them to sort of make this thing a success.
Yeah.
Right.
And for Nintendo to help it sell, and that's how they kept framing the Wii U. It was like, hey, chicken and egg, right? Like we can't if there's no install base, they don't come. They won't make games for it.
Yeah.
That's just the reality. And they've been touting a number. They keep saying,
Right.
hey, 50 games in development, and that's great. But E3 is your proving ground for that.
Right.
For when third parties really start announcing what the rest of the year looks like. That's when you really got to start seeing some big brands, not every brand,
Right.
but some big brands end up on Wii U.
But if you look
on
at
Switch,
for the original Wii, right, huge install base, but
Yeah.
attach rate for third-party games was so low.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, Ubisoft obviously made a bundle in the beginning,
Yeah.
and then after that, just nobody bought games. They just bought Nintendo games.
Yeah.
Because it was the audience that was a very different audience that bought games. And
Yeah.
like Carnival games, 2K
Yeah,
was a humongous hit
Mm-hmm.
too, right? It was that kind of casual fare that succeeded. I mean, there's a chance that you'll actually get a lot of third-party games, but they may not be the ones you want. They may be the last generation ports, right? And that can be a good thing when it's a Fallout. And you
Right.
want to play Fallout on the go, and you never jumped in, or the first Red Dead Redemption,
Right.
But that's not going to excite people who have the new machines and have been with gaming for a long
Yeah,
time.
like, oh, I want
right?
Titanfall
Yep.
3 on this
Yeah.
thing. It's like,
Yeah.
that's not going to happen.
And like, I mean, I was kind of ringing this bell a couple weeks ago, and it was one of my concerns about the power of the system. And I think a lot of people misinterpreted it that I was like, I want a third PS4. Like, I don't. I do want something. Now, this is their third system in a row where it's been more difficult and arduous for a third-party developer to sort of drag and drop a game or bring something over without it taking a few hits here and there. If you look at stuff like Splinter Cell, which came to Wii U, completely nixed the entire online mode, which is like a major focus of that game.
oh, they're
And-
really good with the online. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was really good. And I played it on Wii U, and I enjoyed the single player stuff. But when I finished it, I was like, "Oh, there's nothing left here."
Yeah.
So I mean, you run into those kind of issues. I think where this will succeed is the idea of something being portable, which is the advantage that none of the other consoles have.
No, and I do think, and maybe you guys will disagree with me, but I don't think there is value in Nintendo being the third platform to be identical to the other two.
No.
I don't see a ton of value in that scenario either. If this were a more powerful box,
I think that's what
I don't.
core, I think that's what core fans wanted.
They want, but I don't think that's a reality.
And I think that's the argument from people who are probably would have never bought a Nintendo machine. When they look at it, they say, why would I buy this? This is not as powerful as my PlayStation 4, right? Like, I think there was still that hope, but like, yeah, that doesn't make a ton of sense, right? Like the GameCube and competed not on even grounds in a lot of ways either, because the disc was smaller, right? Like certainly
but
didn't have
tech-wise,
the
the
online,
power-wise
but it
was
was
there.
closer to the
Yeah.
other machines. And some games actually, like Time Splitters, ran better on that machine than on the others. But that didn't help that machine succeed because it was the third machine out there. And so then it comes down to marketing and system image. And so I don't think a Nintendo machine would ever work as the more powerful version of the PS4. I just don't think they can succeed in that market.
Xbox and Sony are toe to toe on third party games. Like, what's the difference? You know, the first party offering pretty much. And even then, like, I just don't see enough distinction between the two anymore, and that always kind of bothers me. 'Cause I'm
No,
like,
but
which do I pick?
It's just what I think it does is it presents a scenario where the console just looks better as a whole because there's more options and more things to play on it. When Nintendo isn't knocking it out the park every 2 or 3 months with a new game, sometimes less, sometimes more, it gives you stuff to play in between.
You need
And
a
I think-
bunt.
Yeah,
You need a single.
And I think the expectations were sort of set up by Nintendo themselves when they first showed us back in October that big splash screen of all the logos of different third parties working on this thing.
Right.
Yep.
We immediately said to ourselves, "Oh, that looks like something you would see for the PS4 or the Xbox. Like this thing's getting major third party support."
Right.
Fast forward to now, and you have companies like Ubisoft, which I think are taking a very sort of timid approach with it.
Very
EA,
unusual for Ubisoft.
Yeah,
Right.
Ubisoft
Unless
usually
there's
they're
something
there
one
day
with, like, a
yeah.
ton of stuff,
Always,
right?
always.
Unless
Something
there's something
exclusive.
in the background they're just saving to E3 or saving for
Maybe.
the future.
Right.
Right, maybe
I
they're
think
just like,
it's
let's
that.
get out of the way of Nintendo for this Switch
For
announce,
launch.
and
Yeah.
then you know at E3
We'll
let's
show up and say, "Hey,
everything.
September, boom."
It's also, again, the tech is sort of not necessarily holding back the vision that I think third parties have, but it is impacting the way that they present their games. If you look at a game like Steep, which is an always online game, they talked about recently how the Ubisoft games, why the decision to bring those specific games, Rayman, Steep, and what was the third one? Just Dance,
Dance.
to the Switch, and they said, like with these games, you can bring them anywhere, and with Steep, you can go all over your home.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, wait a minute. So that's right. This won't be online all the time because this doesn't have its own data. So it basically will work on Wi-Fi. So now you're immediately looking at games that hinge a lot on multiplayer aspects, online multiplayer aspects, and going, well, you pretty much have to be tethered to a stable Wi-Fi, and that's just going to impact the decisions that I think people have bringing their games.
It's different developing.
Sure.
I mean, even mobile games like these devices are always on, but people don't want to eat up your data, so they will design around that too. It's really interesting. The logo, the promenade of logos in the beginning. You see Capcom, you're like, ooh, Resident Evil 7. It's like, no, it's Street Fighter 2, right? Like they're definitely like the early whammies, but and that game looks really fun and it will bring back great memories. But I think we'll have to wait till E3 to see whether there is a second step that shows something more current and new.
That's the proving ground for third party, I think, and that has to show and signal that future. All right, so let's then move on to round 3. We're going to be talking to Steven, our good friend Steven has been collecting video games for a very long time, and we've talked to him about that on this program. But today he brought some special stuff.
I did,
and he brought some cool stories. So
is
get
it
ready
a Switch?
For that. No.
I'm gonna switch things up. Okay, so
to 1986.
This is 1986. I guess we can hand these off.
All right.
Take a look. Okay,
so what are we holding?
These look like regular Nintendo NES black box games, kind of that you bought on the NES launch.
Sure.
What's special about them is the white sticker that's in the middle of all three. And the sticker says Nintendo V Magnavox 86C1606 liability damages.
Wow.
So these were actually used in the court case of Nintendo V Magnavox on the patent infringement that Magnavox basically leaned on for many, many years. In fact, it was litigation like this that kind of killed Mediagenic to where Bobby Kotick could come in, buy it, and turn it into Activision.
Wow.
Like, this is a very wide-ranging patent.
And they took him to court because
it was Ralph Baer actually had developed
father of video games.
The father of video games, right? And so they were
called.
granted patents that basically said like displaying electronic signals on a television and things like collision, registering those, so that it's basically all video games have elements of that. And Sanders Associates, which Ralph Baer worked for, they licensed that to Magnavox and then Philips, and they just took everybody to court, right? Atari famously settled because they didn't have enough money to engage in the litigation, right? So these, what happens is the lawyers for Magnavox went out and they bought these games, they bought a system, and they gave it to Ralph Baer and basically said, like, okay, where are they infringing on patents? And so I have the testimony of Ralph Baer. I didn't bring it. But he basically writes down notes on, like, here's all the places where they're using, like, the different patents, and here's why we'll win. And so in court, these were used as exhibits.
Yeah, they're all tagged with different letters on them, and they were noted in the court log.
Yeah, they're all noted
evidence.
So
yeah.
how
I was
did
gonna say,
how did you get this?
Get out? Right. How did this get out?
Did you steal this from like the basement of the police station in the wire?
Well,
like,
these are civil cases, right? So they're not criminal. So that I didn't have to like break into a police.
No Mission Impossible.
Right? Yeah,
like,
exactly.
insert
It's
that
like,
I'm picturing like that scene in Breaking Bad where they magnetize everything in that.
Oh
room.
yeah. Well, yeah. Exactly.
That was so good.
A little too much information, Brian. No, so really what happened here was there was an author who had worked with Ralph Baer on his biography. Okay. And during that collaboration, Ralph Baer gave him this and a bunch of other things, right? And then eventually that writer had to sell his collection. So what happened was there was an original, one of these games showed up on eBay, and I missed it. Actually, I found out after the fact. I'm like, what is that sticker? And then we're digging in and finding out more.
Did the seller know what he had?
The seller knew what they had, right?
Right,
it went for a lot of money.
Okay.
I think it was like an Excite bike or something. And so...
A lot of money is what?
I think it went for $8,000, something
That's
like
a lot
that.
of money.
Yeah,
a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of
I mean,
switches.
these are basically these are things that I'm just every once in a while I look at. It's like, why is this in my collection? This is so crazy to own. And so what happened was we found out that writer was in France and he was selling through an auction house. And so it was a live auction in Paris.
And his name was Ralph Lebert.
It was. I do know his name. I'm not
Wait,
going to
did you
share
go
it
to the
now, but
auction?
Yeah. So I was like, can I fly to Paris and be part of? But I found out I could be a phone bidder.
You were the guy on the phone?
So I was. You know when you see like the movie scenes, like
Yeah.
on phone bidder. I think I was that guy, and I felt like great and weird at the same time. I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm the phone bidder, and I knew I had to win them, right? So
2000 francs.
yeah, so, I mean, I had to first get someone on the phone who spoke like strong English,
Yeah.
because he had to relay things to me because all the audio was French, right? Everything was in French,
Yeah.
and lot numbers and everything. So, and I had my catalog and I had everything circled, and bids are coming in fast, so I'm like yelling things out in euro. And ended up winning the games that were for sale that auction, and then there was another one where the rest of them went for sale.
Wow.
What's the total count that you got?
So I have I'm missing 5 of the games, and
Those are the ones you missed.
those are the ones I missed in that first slot. But I have everything else, and I also have, for instance, Ralph Baer's testimony from that trial. There's a lot of folded flat boxes and everything else.
You're missing 5. This is like the most expensive gacha game ever.
Right, yeah. Well, so actually, I'm part of the Video Game History Foundation, and one of the things we're doing is preservation and archival, like basically allowing academics, if they want to study artifacts like this, how can we make that happen? So these are all going to a museum. In fact, my entire collection is being donated to different museum projects. We're working on, someone wants to know, give me every review of this game, like Super Mario 3, and we have all the paperwork to support that. So
cool.
that's the stuff we're working on now.
Really, really cool.
And so the other thing I brought was this.
this one's good.
It's a T-shirt, and I'm going to hand it over. So for those of you just listening to the audio, it's a
up,
black
close up,
T-shirt,
Cam.
and it's got Rob on the front in pink. It's a hand drawing of Rob.
Rob the robot with pink eyes, which
With
is
pink
pretty
eyes,
awesome.
yeah. And then on the back is really the
part.
important part. It says, "A Star is Born, New York City, October 9th, 1985." So this was a T-shirt that Nintendo employees wore at a party before the FAO Schwartz launch in New York City.
Oh my God.
So-
wow. That's so cool.
Yeah, and so we knew about this is one of those like piecing everything together. Blake Harris, when he was writing his book, he found an invite to the party. So it says, celebrate Rob's birthday, right? And so here's the event in New York City. And Frank Cifaldi has a pin that basically has that image on it. And then I found the shirt. And the shirt was actually as part of a whole different lot where you're like, that's a weird looking Nintendo shirt. And you can't see the back, right? And so picking it up and then you flip it around like, wait a minute. Like, now we have a piece of, basically pre-NES launch material. So,
Yeah, that's like one
And
of the earliest pieces of Nintendo of America swag, right?
Yeah. So there's another piece actually that was the Summer CES shirt that I also have, and that's
Pre-E3.
pre-E3, right? So these are the first 2 pieces, and then the AVS brochure that shows the different looking NES. So I have that one as well.
The knitting brochure too?
Yeah, now you're knitting with power.
Yes,
Yeah,
that was a
on
thing.
there,
That was a thing.
So one of the funniest things I think is in Nintendo World in New York City, they have the display of all the historical
Yeah.
prototypes and
There's
things
a
like
piece
that.
in there that isn't something a lot of folks recognize that I've heard people talk about.
roller
It's the
controller?
I think so. I
Yeah.
think that was it.
Well, so there's a couple things there. There's a roller controller, which is really odd looking. The NES, the console itself is different because it's clearly a mock-up, and then the controller ports are turned. So they're vertical instead of horizontal, or horizontal instead of vertical. But the other funny thing is they have an AVS brochure in there, and there's a post-it note that says the only one in existence. And then I posted it on Twitter. I'm like, well, there's actually another one. It's in our collection. So
It's right here.
it's right here, and so Frank Cifaldi has been doing a great job restoring that, scanning and restoring it. The physical artifact is going to be obviously going to a museum project as well.
That's so cool.
An interesting side note for folks, if you're unfamiliar with why Rob was so important and thereby on the front of that T-shirt, it had a lot to do with how Nintendo decided to introduce the console when they decided to sort of resurrect and bring bring back the video game business. Because remember, video games were over; it was considered a fad.
Yep.
And here's Nintendo going, "Hey, video games are cool again." And the way they kind of did that was first they made it look like what was essentially a VCR to some extent. It looked like sort of a home electronic, like almost an appliance or just a thing that you would put in an entertainment center, and it would fit well.
No wood paneling.
Yeah, but then the second thing was a robot. And the robot being like the future. Ooh, I hit the mic cord. I'm going to say it again, the future of sort of entertainment. And they build it all on this robot, which unfortunately didn't really work as well as they'd hoped.
But it got the attention.
TV,
And it got them into,
but it got them,
and it got them
the
into toy
attention.
stores.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
was the
so
main
FAO
thing.
Schwartz, like famously, Nintendo basically made the deal with FAO Schwartz saying, like, we will buy back anything that's unsold. And they had their employees in New York City basically in the store just selling the console, right?
For our European listeners, FAO Schwartz was actually shut down, right? The
Yes, it
franchise.
was short.
Yeah.
It was a big toy store chain, like specialty toy store. You can see it in the movie Big when
Oh, man.
Yeah,
Tom
with
Hanks
dancing on the piano,
dances around on the
that's
piano.
FAO
Yeah.
He's
I
not
was-
kidding. It's specialty store was like a toy store.
yeah.
Is a light way of putting it. Like you walk in as a kid. and it was just-
Disneyland.
Yeah.
It was Disneyland. It was train sets. It was wall to wall displays.
No, it was
of
like
setup
where
in
like the
ways that you
sons
couldn't
and
believe it.
daughters of like Saudi princes go shopping. Because
If you're like giant stuffed giraffe,
you're
it's
like,
like
I want a
$10,000.
20-foot giraffe to bring home.
Yeah.
No, I was actually there a couple years ago, I guess, right before it closed, not knowing it was closing down. And I was in New York recently, just kind of like walking around with my wife, being like, I really want to go to like one of those big toy stores. And they shut down Toys R Us Times Square.
Oh, wow.
And they shut down FEO Schwartz. So there's really no big box toy stores in New York City anymore.
You can still hear that song too. The Welcome to our
Yeah.
world.
Yeah,
Welcome
right.
to our world of
Awesome.
toys.
Their video game section, I remember going once as a little kid into the actual Nintendo section there, and it was incredible.
It's awesome, and they like trains driving around
Yeah, it was
everywhere.
just, it was just unbelievable. It was like being in a
But
like
yeah,
in a movie.
That was, I mean, they managed to make a relationship with a high-profile toy seller like that, right? At a time when everybody said, "No, video game machines are poison," right?
Oh yeah, and they did it smart by starting in New York and focusing the effort. Right, it was like, hey, if we can make it here, we can make it anywhere. Was sort of the mentality, right? Yeah, the New York motto.
What's great about this shirt is it has the date on it, right? Because there's a lot of people forget. It's like, was it like a Tuesday or was it like a Thursday where we were on the, and then this helps kind of set, all right, well, we had that party on a Saturday and we knew it was a couple days later, so we were able to narrow down like the exact dates. For some of these
How funny that it's so hard to find out the date of something that seems so close,
we
right?
don't know what the official release date of Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
I mean, like Frank has narrowed it down, but there's no specific release date.
Yeah, and this
it's
has a lot
And there's
to
one review, right? It was those
right, I saw
women who
that.
were doing like a video distribution newsletter. Is basically the only published review of Super Mario Brothers.
Did they like it?
Yeah. They're like, oh, look, the funny thing is, like in features, it's like features A, jump, B, run, and start pauses, right? Like they're actually calling stuff like that out.
Yeah, the earliest video game criticism
But
you
it's
can find.
I think this thing though is a great reminder as to how stunty Nintendo was and how clever in getting people to talk about their machines. And you know what ultimately worked for the Wii was seeing people use the controller, and like that's the gamble here, right? Like when they present the Switch, just the motion of taking it out and docking the thing and putting the controllers on has that kind of cool toy factor again.
Right.
I'm really curious to see what people will think once they actually see it, because there are no commercials running or anything.
Yeah, well, and it's a cool part of, I think, that company's sort of identity in the video game space. Like, you definitely see among the competitors, the folks the other companies that make games, there is sort of a slant towards the mature, the more in some ways, something that kind of sticks with you after you're done, like the meaningful kind of thing. And that's not to diminish Nintendo games, but I think Nintendo games' advantage is inclusion. I think it is very much like that ability to kind of scale really well in some cases. Something like 1-2 Switch was just wacky, or something like Wii Sports, or just like video games when they jump-started video games again. I think they stumbled on that by accident, but I still think they got it right. Those games were nothing like arcade games. They weren't out to like make you insert another quarter or make you like frustrated in the moment to like stay at the machine. It was a little different, I felt, even though some were really hard too, like to be fair. But I just think that that's a unique spark of the company as a whole, and something that they get and something that they do well. And when they get it right, they do really well. And when they get it wrong, we all end up frowning.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about the games in Nintendo's history. Litigation is unfortunately a big part of Nintendo's history, right? They've been involved in a lot of lawsuits. They lost this one, and they lost another summary judgment against Magnavox. So it's going to be interesting to see how it shapes things going forward. There's still a lot of like motion control lawsuits going on, but there's the games, and then there's how did the company get to where it was. This is when Nintendo was scrappy, right? They had to have employees, like half the entire staff was in New York trying to sell a parent and a kid on an NES directly, right?
Yeah,
and look where they are now.
Well, and you mentioned his name, but Frank Cifaldi, who was former journalist, who now sort of works with you on
so he's
cool
our
things?
CEO and founder. So we are a nonprofit. Right.
Okay.
And he's doing a lot of our archival work right now. We'll have more things to announce in the next couple weeks, but we're really trying to get all this information and these artifacts out to people. We don't want to run a museum, but it all belongs in a museum.
Yeah.
Belongs in a museum.
I almost feel terrible because I wasn't sure how much you wanted me to say yet about the Historical Society. So I was just like, yeah, Steve collects games. And I'm just like, you idiot. Like, he does so much more than that. Like, you're a student of history, and you definitely are united with people who care about preserving it. And that's very important because, like, not knowing the date of Super Mario Brothers, truthfully, is the result of paper records and of like poorly kept paper records at that.
Yeah.
And like now in this age of digital, like everyone's like racing to preserve what they can because stuff is disappearing.
Yeah.
And that's sad.
People are dying. So we're trying to get oral histories and get stories from the people who were there. And a lot of times they forget. So we can have documentation and really help set the table. It's like, this is where you were, here's who you were working with, and all this paper and everything really helps us. We talked about whenever companies move offices, those were always the times where things just, huge boxes just got thrown.
And think about it, we're talking about one of the biggest successes in gaming, like a huge game, and the records are lost.
Yeah.
Now go into your Vectrexes and Fairchild Channel Fs and your Apple Pippins and all these devices that many people have never heard of, right? Where records are being lost every year.
Right.
And it struck me when Mike, a good friend of yours, I think he took the pieces of the building, the Atari building, because it was being torn down.
So I was part of that. We were
You were
climbing
there
under
too.
the fence to grab pieces of the destroyed Atari building in Sunnyvale. And then
You guys stole rocks.
Yeah, we stole rocks basically, but I have this big chunk of concrete that I have a story I can tell when I have.
That's
that.
my favorite thing about whenever you're on the show and you bring something, because there's always this fun story waiting at the end of it. So I'm really grateful and glad that you were able to come out.
I'm glad to be here.
What can you tell folks about the future for this Historical Society? Like, are there things coming?
Things are coming. We're kind of, right now, we're still doing a lot of our paperwork. We are an official 501c3, which is a nonprofit organization in the United States. We're working on things like soliciting donations. Like I said, my entire collection is going through the foundation, and we're kind of learning, this is an endless quest, right? That there's no end to what we could potentially go through and write about. So we're trying to do some focusing there. And we're on gamehistory.org, which is a great URL, gamehistory.org on Twitter, and then following myself, Frank, Mike, Simon, and Chris on Twitter. We're trying to just share some of the things we find, and then we'll kind of bring that all together and share more in a couple weeks.
Excellent. That's awesome, man. Again, super grateful you were able to make the time and sort of just bring us a little closer to this stuff. I think we really appreciate it because we were there, right? Like, we're the target audience, I think.
Totally.
Whereas maybe some younger folks watching the show, I'm not sure if you care as much, but I encourage you to because this is very important to this industry that we care about so much. Yeah. Sweet. All right. Well, that's our show. Next week, we're going to have to talk about some question box questions. I know some of you have been emailing us and talking to us, and we definitely want to address those questions, but we'll get to it. And, thank you for listening to Nintendo Voice Chat. And if you are listening to the podcast audio version and saying, man, I wish I can see these things. In fact, you can just go to youtube.com/Nintendo Voice Chat. We actually have a new production going on. We got a nice set. We got a lot. We're making moves here on Nintendo Voice Chat. And really quickly, thanks for watching. Leave us a review, leave us a comment, let us know what you think of the show, or email us at nvc@ign.com. We always want to hear your feedback. So really quick, let's talk about Twitter handles. Where can they find you on the internet? And make sure you plug your websites again. You first, Steven.
Stephen P. Lin on Twitter, stevelin.com, and gamehistory.org.
All right. And
I'm
Brian,
at Agent Bizzle, and you can find me on IGN.com.
Nice. I didn't know that. Holy
That's crazy.
What about you, GM Supreme?
I'm Pierre IGN on Twitter. You can also find me on Facebook, and you can find me on IGN by leaving a nice comment somewhere, and I'll find it and I'll respond.
Sweet. All right. And you can find myself, Jose_Otero. Thank you so much for listening, watching, and we'll be back next week with more Nintendo Voice Chat.
Bye.